The sun was high in the Arizona sky, hot and blinding. The air shimmered above the sand as if the earth itself was on fire. A young Apache woman named Taya ran barefoot across the dry desert land. Her breath came in sharp gasps and her dark hair clung to her face with dust and sweat. Behind her, far in the distance, smoke rose from what used to be her village. Soldiers had come at dawn, shouting orders, setting homes ablaze. The people she loved had scattered in every direction. She had seen her mother fall, and that image would never leave her heart. Now she was alone, clutching a small knife she had found in the ashes before escaping. The knife was dull, but to her it was the only thing standing between life and death. Her throat burned from thirst, and her feet bled from walking on sharp stones. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to stay alive. As the day grew longer, her vision blurred. Every shadow looked like a threat. She thought she saw movement near the hills, men on horseback. Panic rushed through her body. She ran toward the nearest group of rocks, her legs trembling. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear anything else. When she peeked from behind a rock, she saw him, a tall man on a brown horse wearing a wide hat, leather boots, and a long coat that brushed against the saddle. A rifle hung from his shoulder, and his eyes were scanning the land like a hunter looking for prey. Fear filled her. To her, every white man looked like the soldiers who had attacked her people. She didn't know this man's name. She didn't know that his hands had never taken part in any raid. All she saw was a cowboy, strong, armed, and heading straight in her direction. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the rock, hoping he would ride past. But the man slowed down, his horse snorting softly as if it sensed someone nearby. He called out in English, "Hey, anyone there?" The voice echoed in the dry air. Taya didn't understand the words, but the tone made her heart race faster. She thought he was calling out for help to capture her. She gripped her knife tightly, ready to defend herself if he came closer. The man, Cole Bennett, was not looking for trouble. He was a rancher, out in the wild looking for a missing calf that had wandered away from his herd. He had no idea he was about to meet someone who would change his life forever. From a distance, he had seen something moving. Small, quick, frightened. He thought it might be an injured person, maybe a settler lost in the desert. He wanted to help. When he came closer, he saw her. The sight froze him. The young woman looked wild and desperate, her dress torn, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes wide like a trapped deer. She looked ready to fight or flee. He gently dismounted his horse, holding up both hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." But Taya didn't understand. To her, every word sounded like a threat. She lifted the knife in front of her, her whole body trembling. Cole stayed still. The desert wind blew between them, lifting dust around their feet. The silence felt heavy, filled with fear and distance. He slowly unhooked his rifle and laid it on the ground. Then he took a few steps back and pointed at his horse, then at the canteen hanging from the saddle. He opened it, took a small sip, and placed it on a rock halfway between them. His movements were slow, calm, deliberate. The way a man might move around a wild animal he didn't want to startle. Taya's lips were cracked from thirst, but she still didn't move. Her eyes darted from his face to the rifle, then back to the canteen. The man stepped away again, giving her space. Minutes passed. The sun burned her skin. Finally, when she was sure he wouldn't attack, she crawled forward slowly. She picked up the canteen, sniffed it, and drank a small sip. The cool water shocked her throat, making her close her eyes in relief. Cole watched quietly, trying not to scare her. When she looked back up, their eyes met for the first time. Something changed in that moment. She still feared him, but she also saw something unexpected: kindness. He spoke again, slowly, his voice low and steady. "You're hurt," he pointed to her bleeding feet. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the gesture. Cole tore a piece of cloth from his sleeve and knelt down. He placed it on the ground, not touching her. Then he pointed to her feet and back to the cloth, showing her what he meant. Taya hesitated. She didn't know whether to trust him, but when she saw the dust and blood on her feet, she sat down and pressed the cloth against the worst cut. The cowboy smiled faintly, relieved that she wasn't running anymore. He looked at her knife and nodded, showing respect. He knew she had survived something terrible. No one carried eyes like hers unless they'd seen too much pain. For the rest of that day, they didn't speak. They simply shared the desert. He gathered some dry brush and started a small fire as the sun began to set. The smell of burning wood drifted through the cool air. Taya sat at a distance, her body still tense. The shadows made everything feel closer, quieter. She watched him roast a piece of jerky over the flames, then place a portion on a flat rock near her side. He didn't look at her directly, just gestured gently up and offering food. Her stomach growled. She had not eaten since morning. After a long silence, she reached out and took the food. It was salty and strange, but it filled her empty stomach. Cole leaned back against a rock, staring at the stars. He wondered who she was, where she came from. He had seen Apache people before. Traders, hunters, sometimes enemies of the town. But this woman was alone, frightened, and silent. When he looked at her again, she was watching the fire. Her eyes reflected the glow, tired but alive. That night the wind picked up. The air turned cold, and dark clouds rolled in from the mountains. A desert storm was coming, the kind that could flood a canyon in minutes. Cole knew they needed shelter. He whistled for his horse and pointed toward a rocky overhang nearby. He picked up the saddle and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, still unsure. But when lightning cracked across the sky and rain began to fall, she followed him. They took cover under the rocks. The storm roared outside, rain pounding the earth, thunder echoing through the canyon. Cole built another small fire, keeping it low. He removed his coat and placed it on the ground for her to sit on, then sat across from her. She shivered, hugging herself. The cold cut through her wet clothes. Cole noticed and reached for his saddlebag, pulling out a blanket. He walked halfway toward her, then stopped. He placed the blanket on the ground and stepped back, waiting. Minutes later, when the wind howled louder, she slowly reached out, pulled the blanket close and wrapped it around her shoulders. Cole smiled quietly. He didn't say a word. For the first time since her village burned, Taya felt a small spark of safety. She listened to the rain tapping on the rocks, and in that soft rhythm her heartbeat began to slow. As the storm passed, the sky turned calm again. The fire flickered gently between them. She whispered something, her name. Taya. Cole looked up, surprised. Taya, he repeated softly, trying to pronounce it the same way. She nodded. Then she pointed at him. He smiled and said, Cole. They said nothing more, but something unspoken passed between them. Two lost souls finding a fragile peace in the desert night. When dawn broke, the light touched the red cliffs and turned them gold. Taya sat by the fire, watching Cole pack his things. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she didn't feel like running. The next morning, the desert was quiet again. The storm had left the ground soft, and the air smelled of wet dust and sagebrush. Cole stirred the fire and looked over at Taya. She was sitting with her knees close to her chest, her blanket still wrapped around her. Her long black hair was tangled from the wind, but her eyes were calm for the first time. Cole poured some coffee from his tin pot and handed her a small cup. She looked at it, unsure. He took a sip first, showing her it was safe, then offered it again. She hesitated, then took a tiny sip. The warm drink surprised her, bitter but comforting. Cole smiled faintly. Good? He asked softly. She didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. He broke a piece of dry bread and shared it with her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fill their stomachs. When they finished, he packed his things and pointed toward the horizon. Town's that way, he said, though he knew she couldn't understand. He pointed to her, then to himself, then to the horse, trying to tell her she should come with him. Taya looked at him suspiciously. She didn't trust towns, and she didn't trust men who lived in them, but when she looked around, all she saw was endless desert. No trails, no people, no food. Her heart told her she didn't have a choice. Slowly she nodded. Cole helped her onto the horse. She clutched the saddle horn tightly, nervous at first, then steadied herself as the horse began to move. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the smell of rain and grass. She hadn't felt that kind of peace in a long time. They rode for hours, crossing dry riverbeds and low hills. Cole didn't speak much. He didn't want to scare her with too many words she couldn't understand. Every now and then he would glance back to make sure she was okay. When the sun began to drop behind the red rocks, they reached a small creek. He stopped the horse and let it drink, then helped her down. He pointed to the creek and said, Water. She repeated softly, Water. Her voice was quiet but curious. Cole grinned. He didn't expect her to try to repeat his words. That's right, he said proudly, though she didn't know the meaning of his tone. They camped there for the night. Cole built another fire and roasted a rabbit he had caught earlier. The smell of cooked meat filled the air. Taya watched every move he made, learning how he used his knife, how he turned the food over the flames, and how carefully he handled everything. He was nothing like the men she had seen before, rough soldiers or traders who spoke harshly and looked at her people with hate. This man was quiet, gentle, patient. When he offered her food, she took it without fear this time. As she ate, she pointed to herself and said, "Taya." He smiled and nodded, then pointed to himself. "Cole." They said their names again, laughing a little. It was the first sound of laughter either of them had heard in weeks. After dinner, Cole pulled out a small book from his saddlebag, a worn journal where he wrote about his ranch. Taya leaned closer, curious. She had never seen anyone write before. He noticed her interest and gently drew a line in the dirt with a stick, then wrote her name beside it. She tilted her head, amazed. He pointed to the letters. "Taya," he said again. She smiled brightly, realizing the marks meant her name. That smile stayed in his mind long after the fire went out. The next day, they reached his ranch, a small but peaceful place near a line of cottonwood trees. The main house was made of wood and stone, and a few horses grazed nearby. Chickens clucked around the barn. The land was wide and golden, with mountains rising in the distance. Cole stopped the horse and looked at her. "Home," he said. She stared at the house, unsure what he meant. To her it looked strange, not like the earth lodges or tents of her people. But there was something warm about it. Smoke rose gently from the chimney. He helped her down and led her to the porch. His old dog, a big brown mutt named Rusty, barked once, then wagged its tail. Taya jumped at the sound, but Cole laughed softly and patted the dog's head. "Friend," he said, pointing to the animal. Rusty sniffed Taya's hand and then lay down, tail thumping. Cole opened the door and showed her inside. The cabin was simple. Wooden floors, a table, a few chairs, and a bed in the corner. There was a cross hanging on the wall and a picture of a woman, his late wife, Mary. The sight of the picture made him pause for a moment. He swallowed and turned away. He pointed to the chair. "Sit," he said gently. She obeyed, watching everything with wide eyes. He brought her more water and a clean piece of cloth for her feet. When she tried to take it, he gestured that he would help. Slowly, he knelt down and cleaned the cuts, careful not to hurt her. Taya didn't move. Her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever treated her wounds before, not even when she was a child. When he finished, he smiled kindly. "Better," he said. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." The words came out softly, broken, but clear enough for him to understand. He froze for a second, surprised. Then he smiled again, touched by her effort. "You're welcome," he said quietly. That night, Taya sat near the fire inside the cabin while Cole cooked beans and cornbread. He kept stealing glances at her, still amazed at how their paths had crossed. She looked fragile, yet there was a strength in her silence that humbled him. When it was time to sleep, he gave her the bed and laid a blanket for himself on the floor. She shook her head and gestured for him to take the bed instead. He smiled and refused. "You rest," he said. She didn't understand the words, but she saw the kindness in his eyes. As she lay down, she looked at the flickering firelight on the wall. For the first time since the soldiers came, she felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear. Days passed slowly. Taya began to understand small words. Water, food, horse, fire, sleep. She helped around the ranch, feeding the chickens and brushing the horses. Cole showed her how to use tools and gather eggs. When she laughed at the chickens chasing her, he couldn't help but laugh too. Each day, they grew a little closer, not through words, but through gestures, patience, and quiet understanding. One evening, Cole took her outside to show her the sunset. The sky was painted with orange and gold, and the mountains looked like giant shadows. He pointed to the colors and said, "Beautiful." She repeated softly, "Beautiful." Her voice carried warmth, and her eyes reflected the same sky. He looked at her for a long moment, realizing that somehow, without words, she had filled the silence in his life. But not everyone saw things the same way. When Cole went to town for supplies, people whispered. "You heard about Bennett?" one man said. "He's got himself a wild Apache woman living on his land." Cole ignored them. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. Still, when he returned home that day, He noticed Taya standing near the fence, her eyes watching the road. Somehow she sensed the world outside didn't welcome her. He walked up to her and handed her a small gift, a turquoise hairpin he had bought from a trader. "For you," he said. She looked at it, touched, and pinned it in her hair carefully. "Thank you," she whispered again. That night, as the stars shone above the quiet ranch, Cole sat by the fire, writing in his journal. Taya was sitting nearby, humming a soft tune from her childhood, a melody that carried the sadness and beauty of her people. Cole closed his book and listened. For the first time, he didn't feel alone anymore. Something had changed between them, something gentle and unspoken. She had once believed this cowboy would kill her. Now she trusted him with her life. The days turned into weeks, and slowly life on the ranch began to feel peaceful again. Cole worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, tending cattle, and making sure the horses were healthy. Taya helped him quietly, her presence soft but strong. She carried buckets of water, gathered wood, and cooked simple meals. Though she spoke little English, she learned through watching and repeating. When Cole showed her how to saddle a horse, she learned quickly. She had once seen her brothers ride bareback through the plains, but this was different. Cole smiled as she balanced herself on the saddle for the first time. "Good," he said proudly. Taya grinned, her eyes shining with joy. Every day brought new understanding between them, not through words, but through kindness. She began to hum while she worked, old Apache tunes filled with longing and hope. The sound drifted across the ranch, mixing with the wind. Sometimes Cole would stop working just to listen. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the red hills. The world looked golden then, and Cole often thought he had never seen such beauty, not just in the land, but in the peace he felt beside her. But peace does not always last. One morning, Cole rode into town to sell cattle and buy supplies. Taya stayed behind, feeding the chickens and sweeping the porch. When he reached town, the usual chatter in the general store quieted as soon as he walked in. The shopkeeper, Mr. Grady, looked uneasy but tried to act friendly. "Morning, Cole," he said, weighing flour. "Heard you've got company out there at the ranch." Cole nodded. "Found her out in the desert. She needed help." A man standing near the counter snorted. "Help? She's Apache, isn't she? Those people burn farms, steal horses, and worse. You shouldn't have brought her home." Cole turned, his calm eyes sharp. "She's done nothing wrong. She lost her family." The man shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Folks don't like seeing one of them out there, especially living with a white man." Cole's jaw tightened. He said nothing more, took his supplies, and left. As he mounted his horse, he could still hear their whispers behind him. The words didn't bother him much, but he knew gossip spread fast, and gossip in small towns could turn dangerous. When he returned home, he saw Taya waiting at the gate. She smiled, running to open it for him, but he noticed the worry in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, though she couldn't understand the words. She shook her head and smiled again, pretending everything was fine. Still, he sensed something. Fear. That night, as they ate by the fire, Taya looked at him and tried to speak. "People bad?" she asked slowly, searching for the right words. Cole sighed. He looked at her kind eyes and nodded slightly. "Some, yes, but not all." She looked down, thinking deeply. After a moment, she whispered, "I stay." Cole smiled gently. "Yes, you stay. You're safe here." The next few days were quiet, but the peace was fragile. One afternoon, Cole rode out to check the far pasture. Taya stayed home, hanging clothes on the line. She didn't see the three riders approaching until they were close. Dust rose behind them as they galloped toward the house. Her heart jumped in fear. They stopped at the gate, the men from town. She recognized one of them from the store. "Where's Bennett?" the man shouted. She couldn't understand, but his tone was rough, angry. She stepped back, clutching her shawl. The man laughed. "Figures. He's hiding behind a savage now." They rode closer, circling the yard. Rusty barked loudly, running in front of her. One man leaned down and said, "Tell your man to send you back where you belong." He spat on the ground and turned his horse around. Taya stood frozen until they were gone. Only then did she sink to her knees, trembling. Rusty stayed beside her, growling softly. When Cole returned that evening, he found her sitting on the porch, pale and quiet. He could tell something had happened. She pointed toward the road, her hands shaking. "Men! Angry," she said in broken English. Cole's eyes darkened. He knelt beside her. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head. He stood up and looked toward the road, his jaw set. "They won't come again," he said firmly. The next day he rode into town again, this time not for supplies. He found the same men near the saloon laughing loudly. When they saw him, their laughter stopped. Cole walked straight toward them, calm but serious. "You came to my ranch yesterday," he said coldly. The biggest man smirked. "Just warning you, Bennett. That woman doesn't belong here." Cole stepped closer until they stood face to face. "She's under my roof," he said slowly, his voice firm. "Anyone who comes near her again will answer to me." For a moment, no one moved. Then Cole turned and walked away, leaving silence behind him. The men didn't follow. They knew his kind, quiet but not weak. Back at the ranch, life went on. But something had changed. Cole started sleeping lighter at night, keeping his rifle near the door. He didn't tell Taya, but she sensed it. She watched him carefully, her heart filled with gratitude and worry. One morning, she woke early to find him already outside, fixing the fence. The sun was rising behind him, turning his figure into a golden outline. She stood there quietly, realizing how much this man had done for her, a stranger from another world who had chosen to protect her when no one else would. That evening, she made him something special, a meal she remembered from her childhood. Using herbs she found near the creek, she cooked over the fire while he watched curiously. When she handed him the bowl, he tasted it and smiled. "This is good," he said warmly. She laughed, delighted. "Good," she repeated, touching her chest proudly. From that day, she cooked for him often, and they began sharing stories, his in English, hers in broken words and gestures. They didn't always understand, but they always listened. One night, as the moon rose full above the canyon, Taya told him about her family. Using her hands and a few words, she explained how the soldiers came, how her people ran, how her mother told her to flee. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. Cole listened in silence, his heart heavy. When she finished, he placed his hand gently over hers. "You're safe now," he said. She didn't need to understand every word. His eyes said the rest. From that night on, something deeper grew between them. Not just gratitude, but trust. But one late evening, as the wind howled through the valley, Cole noticed a glow in the distance. Faint, orange, and flickering. His heart sank. Fire. He ran outside, shouting for Taya. The barn was burning, the flames climbing fast through the dry hay. He grabbed a bucket and ran toward it, Taya close behind. Together they fought the fire with everything they had. Smoke filled the air, stinging their eyes. Cole pulled the horses out, coughing hard. One of the beams cracked and fell, and Taya screamed his name, the first time she had ever shouted it. He turned just in time to see her rush toward him, dragging a small foal from the fire. They stumbled out together, collapsing in the dirt. When the flames finally died, half the barn was gone. Cole sat there, blackened with soot, breathing hard. Taya sat beside him, her hands shaking. She turned to him, touched his arm, and whispered, "You live." He looked at her, smiling faintly. "Thanks to you." The moonlight fell on their faces, tired, covered in ash, but alive. Something powerful had been born in that fire, a bond that could not be broken. From that night onward, they were no longer two strangers. They were a team, two souls who had survived fear, hate, and fire together. The night after the fire was long and silent. Smoke still rose from the burned barn, curling into the dark sky. The smell of ashes hung in the air. Cole and Taya sat side by side outside the ranch house, both exhausted. The flames had finally died, but the damage was heavy. The barn was half gone, and many of their supplies were lost. Cole rubbed his hands together, still stained with soot. Taya sat quietly, wrapped in his coat. The cold wind carried the faint crackling of what was left of the fire. Rusty lay near them, his fur singed, but his tail thumped weakly whenever Cole spoke. Cole finally broke the silence. "We can rebuild," he said softly, looking at the ruins. He didn't know if she understood, but somehow her gentle nod told him she did. She turned to him and said, "We make new." Her English was broken, but the meaning was clear. He smiled, amazed by her strength. In the following days, they worked side by side. From sunrise to sunset, they cleaned the burned wood, gathered nails, and built again from the remains. Cole taught Taya how to use a hammer, and though her hands blistered, she never complained. When he offered to rest, she shook her head and smiled. "Work strong," she would say proudly. The neighbors saw the smoke and came to check what had happened. Some of them helped for a few hours, but others only came to stare. Whispers began again in town. How strange it was that a cowboy lived with an Apache woman and treated her as equal. But when people saw her courage and how hard she worked, a few began to change their minds. One old rancher, Mr. Dawson, came by with lumber and tools. "Heard you lost your barn, Bennett," he said, setting down the supplies. Then looking at Taya, he added quietly, "She's a strong one. You're lucky," Cole nodded. "I know." That evening, when they finished for the day, Taya surprised Cole by bringing him a small pouch made from leather. Inside it were tiny stones shaped like hearts. "Gift," she said softly, placing it in his hand. He looked at it, touched. "For me?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "You save me. I save you. Same." Cole's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. All he could do was nod and keep the small pouch safe in his pocket from that day on. Weeks passed and the new barn slowly took shape. The sound of hammering filled the valley every morning, and by evening, laughter sometimes followed. Taya had begun to learn more English words, enough to make short sentences. She would point at things and name them. "Horse," she'd say, patting the animal gently. "Sky," she'd whisper, looking up at the stars. Cole often listened, repeating the words in her language too. "Shash," he'd say, using the Apache word for bear. She would laugh, correcting his pronunciation patiently. Those small moments of laughter felt like sunlight after a long storm. But not all the wounds were outside the barn. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Cole noticed Taya staring at the flames with distant eyes. Her fingers played with the turquoise hairpin he had given her. "You thinking about them?" he asked softly. She looked up slowly. "Family," she said in a whisper. "Gone." Her voice cracked on the last word. He put down his cup and moved closer. "I'm sorry," she shook her head. "No sorry. They with Sky now," she pointed upward. "But me, here." Cole wanted to tell her that she was safe, that this place was now her home, but he couldn't find the words. So instead he simply placed his hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. For the first time she leaned her head on his shoulder. The firelight flickered across their faces, and the quiet between them spoke louder than words ever could. Over the next few days their bond deepened. Cole noticed the little things. How she sang softly to the horses while brushing them. How she smiled at the first light of dawn. How her laughter filled the empty spaces in his heart. One afternoon, as they finished building the last part of the barn, Cole stood back to admire their work. "We did it," he said proudly. Taya tilted her head. "We make strong," she said. He chuckled. "Yes, we did. But that night something unexpected happened." As they sat by the fire, Cole heard hooves in the distance. He stepped outside, hand on his belt. 3 riders appeared, not the same men as before, but travelers passing through. They stopped near the fence and called out, "Anyone home?" Cole walked forward. "What do you need?" "Just a place to rest for the night," one man said. "We saw your fire," Cole nodded. "You can camp by the creek. There's water there." The men thanked him and dismounted. One of them glanced toward the house and saw Taya through the window. "That your woman?" he asked casually. Cole's shoulders stiffened. "She's family," he said firmly. The man grinned. "Lucky man," Cole didn't reply. He simply turned back to the house. When he went inside, he saw Taya watching him carefully. "All good?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, all good." But that night he kept the rifle closer to his bed, just in case. Nothing happened, but it reminded him of how fragile peace could be. He realized that he would always have to protect her, not because she was weak, but because the world around them didn't always understand kindness or love that crossed lines. The next morning, after the travelers left, Taya made coffee and bread. She sat beside him and said in careful English, "You—" "Good man." Cole looked at her, surprised. "Me?" She nodded. "Yes, you heart—" "Good," he smiled softly. "So is yours." Her eyes brightened. For a moment time stood still. She didn't see him as a cowboy anymore, and he didn't see her as an Apache woman. They were just 2 people who had found something rare in a world that had taken too much from both of them. Peace, trust, and quiet affection. Days later, spring arrived. Flowers bloomed near the creek and the land turned green again. Taya loved to pick wildflowers, weaving them into small bundles and placing them on the windowsill. She said they brought blessings. Cole just liked how they made the house smell like life again. One Sunday, he decided to take her to town for the first time. She hesitated at first, but he promised, "I'm with you." When they arrived, people stared, whispering softly. But this time, no one said anything cruel. They saw how respectfully he treated her, walking beside her, not ahead of her. He helped her choose a scarf from the store, and when she paid with a silver coin, the shopkeeper smiled and said, "It suits you." That evening, as they rode home, Taya looked at him and said quietly, "People no angry?" Cole nodded. "Not anymore. Maybe they see what I see." "What you see?" she asked, curious. He looked at her for a long moment, the wind lifting her hair as the sun set behind her. "A brave heart," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't try to hide. When they reached home, Cole built a small table outside, and they ate under the stars. The sky was wide and endless, the air soft and cool. For the first time since she had come into his life, they both felt something close to joy, quiet and real. That night, as they sat together, Taya whispered, "You and me." "Same sky now." Cole turned to her, his eyes gentle. "Yes," he said. "Same sky, same home." And when she looked into the firelight, she didn't see the man she once feared. She saw her future, safe, warm, and full of promise. The cowboy who she thought would kill her had become the man who rebuilt her world. Months passed and the seasons changed. What was once a burned and broken ranch now stood strong again. The new barn was bigger, the fences taller, and the fields greener than before. The land seemed to heal just as Cole and Taya had healed together. They worked like a team. Every morning, Taya would wake early, light the fire, and make breakfast. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the house. Cole would come in from feeding the horses, his face dusty and sunburned, but his smile gentle. They didn't need many words. Their eyes spoke enough. One day, while Taya was washing clothes by the creek, she saw her reflection in the water. Her face looked different now, not tired, not afraid. She touched the turquoise hairpin in her hair, the one Cole had given her, and smiled softly. For the first time, she felt she truly belonged somewhere. Cole often watched her from a distance as she worked, the way she moved, calm and graceful, as if she were part of the land itself. He admired her courage, her patience, and the quiet strength she carried. Sometimes he thought of how they met, that frightened woman in the desert, and how fate had led them to this moment. In town, people had begun to see them differently too. The same folks who once whispered now greeted Cole with respect. Some even nodded politely to Taya when she came along. She always smiled shyly, holding Cole's arm, her eyes kind and gentle. One afternoon, the preacher from town, Reverend Harris, visited the ranch. He had heard the story of the fire, of how they rebuilt everything together. He was a kind old man with gray hair and a soft voice. He greeted them both warmly. "Mr. Bennett," he said, shaking Cole's hand. "And this must be the young lady I've heard about." Taya bowed her head politely. "Hello," she said in her quiet English. The preacher smiled. "I can see the Lord's work in both of you," he said. Then, after a pause, he added gently, "Have you thought about making your bond official?" Cole blinked, unsure. "You mean marriage?" The preacher nodded. "Yes. Folks talk less when they see love made honest before God." Cole looked at Taya, who didn't understand all the words but sensed their meaning. She tilted her head curiously, watching his expression. After the preacher left, Cole sat by the porch, deep in thought. He had lost his first wife years ago, and for a long time he believed he would never love again. But here was someone who had walked through fire with him, stood by him when others turned away, and brought light back into his home. That evening, as the stars filled the sky, he turned to her. "Taya," he said softly. She looked up from the fire. "Yes?" He took a deep breath. "You know what marriage is?" She frowned slightly, thinking. "Man and woman. Together?" He nodded. "Yes, together, always." She was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "You want this?" He smiled. "If you do." She didn't answer right away. She looked into the fire, her eyes thoughtful. Then she reached out and took his hand. "Yes," she whispered. Cole's heart swelled. He hadn't realized how much those 3 letters could mean. The next few weeks were filled with quiet excitement. Reverend Harris agreed to perform a small ceremony at the edge of town. Cole made a simple ring from silver, and Taya sewed a dress from white cotton cloth she had kept for special days. On the morning of their wedding, the sky was bright and clear. The air smelled of spring and wildflowers and fresh rain. Taya stood outside the cabin, her white dress fluttering gently in the wind. Her long black hair was braided, and the turquoise pin shone in the sunlight. She looked both nervous and calm, like someone stepping into a new life. Cole waited near the small wooden chapel, dressed in a clean white shirt and his best boots. A few townspeople came to watch quietly. Even those who had once judged him stood respectfully now. When Taya arrived, everyone turned to look. She walked slowly, holding a small bundle of wildflowers she had picked herself. Cole couldn't take his eyes off her. Reverend Harris began the ceremony with a kind smile. Today we witness the joining of two hearts, not by race, not by law alone, but by love and trust that survived hardship. Taya listened carefully, catching only a few words, but she could feel the meaning in his tone. When it was time for the vows, Reverend Harris spoke slowly, and Cole translated as best he could. I, Cole Bennett, promise to care for you and protect you for as long as I live, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. Taya looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. I, Taya, she said slowly, stay with you. Forever. The preacher smiled and blessed them both. When he said, you may seal it with a kiss, Cole hesitated, unsure if she understood the custom. But Taya smiled softly, stepped closer and rested her forehead against his, her way of showing affection from her people. It was a quiet, sacred moment. The small crowd clapped and some even cheered. The preacher wiped his eyes. A fine pair, he said. God surely brought you two together. Afterward, Cole and Taya rode back home under the golden sky. The world felt lighter, as if the land itself had blessed their union. When they reached the ranch, Cole lifted her off the horse and said, welcome home, Mrs. Bennett. She laughed softly, repeating the word, Mrs. Bennett. It sounded new and sweet on her tongue. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the horizon in gold and red. Taya rested her head on his shoulder. You happy? She asked. Cole nodded, his voice low. More than I ever thought I could be, she smiled. Me too. As months went by, their home became a symbol of peace. Neighbors began to visit often, bringing gifts or asking for advice. Taya helped women from nearby farms with herbs and medicine, sharing knowledge from her people. Everyone soon saw her kindness, her wisdom, and her gentle heart. Even the children who once whispered now waved when she passed. Mrs. Bennett, they would call out, and she would wave back, smiling brightly. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air grew quiet, Cole stood near the barn they had rebuilt together. He looked at the land, green fields, healthy horses, and smoke rising from the chimney of their home. He felt something deep in his chest. Peace. Taya walked up beside him, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. She handed him one and looked around. Our place, she said proudly. He nodded. Our home. They stood there for a long while, watching the stars appear one by one. The same stars that had once looked down on fear now shone upon love and safety. Sometimes, when travelers passed by and asked about the story of the Apache woman and the cowboy, the townspeople would tell it softly, a story not of war or anger, but of mercy and courage. They would say, she thought he would kill her, but he gave her life. And he thought he'd never love again, but she taught him how. In the years that followed, their ranch became known as Peace Meadow. It was a place where no one was turned away, where a kind heart mattered more than where someone came from. Cole and Taya grew old together there. They often sat on the same porch where they once watched the desert storms, still holding hands, still laughing at small things. When people asked Cole what love meant, he would smile and say, love isn't about finding someone like you. It's about finding someone who makes you better than you were. And Taya, with her soft voice, would add, love is not fear. Love is home. That was how their story lived on, not as a legend of the wild frontier, but as a gentle truth whispered across generations. The cowboy who once found a frightened woman in the desert had given her safety, and she had given him something greater, a heart reborn. They never spoke of the pain that started it all. They didn't need to. Every sunrise, every shared smile, every quiet evening on their porch was proof that sometimes, even in the harshest places, love grows stronger than fear. And so, under the wide Arizona sky, they built a life together, simple, honest, and forever remembered by those who passed by and saw two souls who had turned loneliness into love.